What's going on, guys? It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. And this one I'm going to go over some of my favorite tips and tricks for use in Dynasty startup leagues. I recently put out a video going over some of my favorite tips and tricks to use in just standard redraft leagues, and I think that a lot of them are pretty similar, but it's also really neat and useful to understand how you should change your approach when you get into a Dynasty league, and especially things you want to consider during your Dynasty startup drafts, because, your Dynasty startup drafts are going to dictate how your league is going to be shaped for many years. Obviously, you're drafting these teams, and they're going to be sitting around for years. You're going to have the same roster year over year, aside from rookies and whatever trades you manage to make. So it's going to be a situation where you want to make sure that you do well in your Dynasty startup draft. You want to make sure that you go into it well prepared and understand what the best things you can do are, what the best practices are, and really how to make sure that you leave that draft happy with your team. So really fun making these videos. I love Dynasty. I've only recently got into it. I've just got a couple years of Dynasty experience under my belt, but it's a super fun format. It's a super fun mix-up. I highly recommend that you guys all try it if you haven't, and it's just a lot of fun. So yeah, with that, let's get into the first tip here. So my first tip here for a Dynasty startup draft is just going to be to get your guys. We all have players that we're super high on, guys that we've believed in for a long time, and guys that we really do believe are going to take that next step, or guys that are going to have just really high-end fantasy careers. And remember, this team that you draft in your Dynasty startup is going to be a team that you're stuck with. That team, you're going to be stuck with the players that you draft forever until they retire or you drop or trade them. So when you draft someone here, you need to make sure that you're doing it with the intention of rostering that player for as long as they're useful for fantasy, and it just makes things a lot more fun if you make sure that you have the guys that you want. It's going to be way more fun if the guys on your team are actually guys that you want to have, guys that you believe in, and not guys that you just sort of drafted because you felt like you had to. I also would recommend that during Dynasty startup drafts, I highly recommend that you be more than willing to trade during the draft. Be willing to move up, move down, and sort of position yourself, position your draft picks so that you are drafting around the areas of the guys that you want to go. I personally do this very often. I am more than willing to, even, for example, trade my first overall pick to get a couple later round picks and make sure that I know, hey, I'm going to get a second round startup pick along with a third and a fourth, or along with a fourth and a fifth or something for my first overall pick, and that's going to allow me to really make sure that I get the guys that I want in the middle rounds. And yeah, it's going to sacrifice something early on, but that's just an example of something I did in my startup draft last season, and something that I did find to be really useful for me, and I really did like how it turned out. So I highly recommend that you do what you can to make sure you get the guys that you want. Obviously, it sounds cliche, but remember, this is a Dynasty startup. This is a team that you're going to have forever, and you're just going to be a lot happier if you do get the guys that you believe in. So my next tip here is going to be to prioritize getting a top-tier quarterback, but I would not worry about getting a second top-tier quarterback. Even in Superflex, I wouldn't even really prioritize drafting a second top 10 quarterback in a Superflex format. Quarterbacks are going to have a very long shelf life for you, so they're really going to be a really nice stabilizing force for you. I do highly recommend that you make an effort to have a top 5 quarterback in Dynasty. In almost every Dynasty draft I'm in, I really prioritize making sure that I have Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, or Joe Burrow. They're all guys that I think are going to have really long careers, really long shelf lives, and guys that are going to be really high-end performers for the next several years, and they're really going to improve the quality of your roster going down for the next several years. It's going to be really nice to have them on your roster, and I don't really see them dropping off anytime soon. But even in Superflex, having that single great quarterback is really going to help stabilize your roster, and you don't really need to focus too much on getting a second one. There's a very minor difference in terms of fantasy points per game between the 10th overall quarterback and the 20th overall quarterback. There will be backup quarterbacks that come in and start throughout the course of the season. You're going to be able to piece together a quality second quarterback spot. In one of my leagues, I've got Jalen Hurts, and then my other two quarterbacks are Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers. I feel really comfortable with that quarterback room because I know that between Russ and Rodgers, I'm going to be able to piece together quality starting production out of that QB2 spot, and then obviously I'm getting Jalen Hurts production in my quarterback 1 spot. So I find that it's just not worth prioritizing spending a high-end draft pick on getting that second quarterback because in general, especially in Superflex formats, the first round is going to be all top-tier quarterbacks. You're going to be looking at that second tier, the guys that are going to be like quarterback 7 plus when you get to your next pick, and it just doesn't make sense to really rush into drafting those guys. I'd much rather take top-tier wide receivers and tight ends and stuff, and just make sure that I'm really building out a really competent roster, knowing that I can get some really competent quarterback play later on. So I do highly recommend, obviously, the top-end quarterback production is super important, but I wouldn't focus too hard on getting another top 10 quarterback because it's really hard to do that without a trade, and you can get really competent quarterback production out of the next 2 spots, out of the quarterback 2 spot if you just sort of piece together a spot there. So my next tip would be just to not focus too much on the age of players. I know that it's a really easy thing to do. You get into a Dynasty format and you're thinking, okay, this is the team I'm going to have for the next 10 years, and you just want to draft nothing but 21 and 22-year-olds, and obviously that's really exciting to have all that youth on your roster, but there are a lot of really good fantasy assets that go much later in drafts just because of their age. For example, guys like Travis Kelce, Austin Eckler, Christian McCaffrey. Even getting later, you've got guys like James Conner, guys like Derrick Henry, David Montgomery, plenty of older players that go significantly later in drafts just because of their age. People understand that they've got a shelf life and the expiration date for these guys is coming, but there's certainly going to be guys that you can get that are really going to help you compete and win a championship this season. And on top of that, the beauty of it is if you do draft them, I often find that these guys come at their most significant discount on draft day. You could pretty easily trade Kelsey for a first or two come the trade deadline in your league this season if things are not going poorly, if you do need to punt on the season and really start sort of looking towards the next year. So having these guys, even if it doesn't work out for you, it doesn't really end up hurting you so much because you can flip them for assets that are going to help you going forward. But I personally do prefer to just focus on pretty much going all in. I want to prioritize winning in year one because if you win a championship in year one, you're set. You can really go 10 more years without winning one in your average. So the goal is to win every single year. Focusing on age is going to really prevent you from doing that because you're always going to be looking 1 year, 2 year ahead. And if you keep doing that, you're never really going to get a peak fantasy performance out of your roster. So obviously age matters in Dynasty, but I think people do overvalue it. There are plenty of really good fantasy assets that you can get that are 27, 28, and older, and they're going to be guys that you're going to get a significant discount, and they're really going to help you in your fantasy leagues this season. My next tip here would be just to not invest in running backs early. You can pretty much get really high-end running back production really late in fantasy drafts and Dynasty because you can draft those older guys like James Conner, Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, Aaron Jones. All these guys are going to be fringe top 10 guys this season, and they don't cost you very much at all. They go in like the fifth or fourth round or later in non-super flex. They go much later than that in super flex leagues, and they're going to give you really high-end production. In my startup draft last season, I was able to get two really high-end quarterbacks early. I got CeeDee Lamb, Stephon Diggs, Mark Andrews, and then by doing that, I punched on running back, and I ended up getting Saquon and James Conner. Obviously, I got pretty lucky there getting Saquon late and him really having that bounce-back year, but that's a really solid running back room, having Saquon and James Conner there, and then you can also grab guys later that are just going to perform at a mediocre level and just sort of piece together running back production. And the fact of the matter is, running backs have a super short shelf life anyway. Really, when you draft a running back, even if it's a rookie, you've probably got 4, maybe 5 good years out of him. Obviously, that's a really long shelf life, and there are exceptions to be made there. So guys like Bijan, he would be a guy that I'd be comfortable drafting pretty early because I know that I'm going to get that long-term production out of him. But things change really quickly for running backs. They do get run into the ground. They really do fall off a cliff really quickly. So guys like Christian McCaffrey, who are going in the first round of Dynasty startups right now, it just doesn't make sense for me to invest that much draft capital in a guy that he's going to go pretty much away in fantasy probably in a year or two. Obviously, he's still going to be elite performer this season, but you can get elite performers at other positions that aren't going to expire in a year or two. So it just doesn't make sense to me to invest really premium draft capital on running backs because it's going to be a rotating carousel for you at the running back position. You're going to have to basically redo your running back position, your running back room every 1 or 2 years. So what's the point in really investing super heavily in high-end guys because you can get high-end wide receivers that are going to last you 6, 7, 8 years, high-end quarterbacks that'll last you 10 years, and even high-end tight ends that'll last you 5+. So the running back position is great. It's really important for fantasy, but I think that you can really piece together quality production. Also, on top of that, you do often see that these older running backs end up going for pretty cheap come the trade deadline. You've got a lot of teams that have older guys that are really just, they realize they're out of it and they're willing to trade them for pennies on the dollar. If you're a contending team, you can go grab a top 15, top 20 running back for like a second round pick next year, and it's really going to help your fantasy team, and it's not going to have costed you a lot, and it's just going to be really nice because you have that elite base floor. For last season, that same startup I was talking about where I got James Conner and Saquon Barkley, I traded my first round pick 2 years down the line and Rashad White, and I was able to get Christian McCaffrey. Obviously, that's a pretty high price tag, but I think it's going to be worth it. Christian McCaffrey helped me get second in that league last season, and I think I'm a contender again this year. So just talking about how you can really get these high-end running backs for pennies on the dollar towards the trade deadline. It just doesn't make sense to trade for them or draft them in startups right now. So my tip number 5 here would be to be willing to go against the mold. I stand by this tip in pretty much any format, but especially in Dynasty. That's just because these are guys, again, that you're going to have forever, so you want to make sure that you're basing all of your decisions off of your own actual opinions. And on top of that, it's incredible how much things can change over the course of 1 year in a Dynasty league. Dynasty rankings are extremely volatile. Just use DeAndre Swift for an example. He was maybe 1 year, 2 years ago, a top 5 Dynasty running back, and now he's not even like a top 10 round pick. He's a guy that really a lot of people are really ready to give up on. That's what I'm talking about with running backs, for the running back position specifically. There's just so much turnaround on that. An example of something I did last year, really sort of exemplifying this, is I traded Aaron Rodgers, a first and a second round draft pick in a super flex league for Jalen Hurts. Seemed like a lot back then, but looks pretty good now. I'm really happy about it. I'm really happy that I was able to pull that trade off. And had I been hung up on what you see with like a Dynasty trade calculator, a Dynasty ADP chart, it really would have just sort of steered me away from making that trade. So as much as these things, these online tools, these dynasty trade cards, all that are helpful little tools, things that you should and can refer to just to see, make sure you're making fair offers and all that. Don't let them be the reason you do or don't do a trade. You want to make sure that whatever trades you're making, you want to make sure that you're utilizing your opinions, going off of how you feel. And if it doesn't work out, then you just need to reevaluate what your process is, reevaluate how you arrived at the conclusions you did. But don't let some online chart that somebody threw together really be the reason that you don't make a trade that you actually do want to make. So tip number 6 here is going to be to not put yourself in a spot where you're going to be rebuilding in year one. I know how tempting it can be to just grab high-end rookies, guys that have a lot of name value and they're just new shiny toys in the NFL, but stocking up on draft picks and rookies and really young players does just carry with it a lot of risk. It's really hard to predict how well players are going to perform just this year in fantasy football. That's why there's so much volatility in terms of where people are drafted versus how they finish year to year. And projecting guys to be really good down the line 2 years from now, 3 years from now, projecting rookie picks in a year or two to be really useful, this really carries with it a ton of volatility, a whole lot of risk, because we don't know how a lot of these rookies, how a lot of these current college prospects are going to turn out. And, putting yourself in a spot where you're rebuilding in year one is really going to put you behind the 8 ball because you're really banking on all these guys panning out that you have no idea on. And especially in a dynasty startup, everybody should be drafting with the intention of being a contender that first year. You want to make sure that you're leaving that season with, you want some youth. You don't want to put yourself in a spot where you're going to have to remake an entire roster after the first year as well. But you need to put yourself in a spot where you're going to be a competitive roster, put yourself in a spot where you're not tanking already. You want to make sure that you're really, first off, it's a dynasty startup. You want to enjoy the first year. I personally do not enjoy the rebuilding process nearly as much. I would much rather be a competitive team. You want to be competitive early on. You want to make sure that you have guys that you are actively seeing produce on the field, and you just don't want to put yourself in a spot where you're banking on your entire team to take a huge step forward the next season, because more often than not, stocking up on draft picks, stocking up on youth, I've just seen it flame out. It's just eventually these guys don't hit, and if they don't hit, then you're really back to square one here, and it's just really tough. So my 7th tip here is going to be to draft the best player available. I know it's really tempting to prioritize just filling out your entire starting roster, filling out a whole roster of, you want to make sure you've got your 1 or 2 quarterbacks, then you've got all your wide receivers, all your running backs, all your flex spot, and then you can start looking at the bench. But there's going to be a ton of turnover for your dynasty roster throughout the years. Even in year one, you're going to be cycling through guys with injury, guys with trades you're looking to make towards the deadline, waiver moves, and all that. And having a really high quality asset, even if it's on your bench, is just going to increase the overall value of your roster. And the total value of your roster is something that you're going to be able to manipulate and mold into the lineup that you're actively searching for. Maybe you do have to end up with a slightly worse starting running back because you drafted a higher end wide receiver in an earlier round, one that ended up on your bench. But now it's the trade deadline. Now you can trade that high end wide receiver that wasn't really playing for you to really take your team to the next level and combine him with that running back and get a really top tier player. So just making sure that you have as much value, as much high quality talent on your roster as possible is going to be the best way to just go forward. It's really hard to predict how your starting lineup, how your roster is going to really form out over the course of an entire season, especially 2 seasons, 3 seasons from now. And just having as much value on your roster as possible is going to allow you to mold things the way you want to. You're going to be more capable, in a better position to trade assets for positions of need and really just improve your roster that way. So I know it's tempting to fill out your starting lineup first, but I do highly recommend that in general you just take the best player available here. And the last tip here, this is one that I like to use in pretty much any format, but especially in Dynasty as well. I think it's really important to know your league mates and know how they play. Everybody's got different approaches to Dynasty. I personally take the all-in approach pretty much every single season. I'm always the guy that's trading my future draft picks for competent players now, really just trying to win in my league every single year and not really having a plan B there. And that means that in general, people can come to me and offer better players for younger players, and I'm more willing to consider that than other leagues. I've also got plenty of people in my leagues that really do love trying to stack up on youth, stack up on draft picks, and it makes me and them really good trade partners because when I get that youth and they have the higher end talent, we're really good trade partners because I know that I can combine my youth and some draft picks to really improve my current roster. So understanding how your league mates are going to want to really draft and how they're going to want to operate and manage their fantasy roster is going to be really helpful for you, not only on draft night, because on draft night you're going to be able to see, okay, Joe over here really loves taking rookies. There's a couple rookies coming up in this. I should really expect him to take those here, and maybe you're going to have to wait and miss out on those positions. But it also is going to help you over the course of your dynasty seasons, help you over the course of just the entire league build out, where you're going to know which teams you can go to, which team's going to be more likely to punt on a season and start rebuilding, and which guys are just going to be optimal trade partners for you. So it's going to be really helpful to understand how your league mates are going to operate, and you'll find that it's just going to make things easier for you as the seasons go on in your dynasty league. So that'll do it for my top tips and tricks for a Dynasty startup and sort of just the Dynasty tips and tricks in general. I hope you guys did enjoy that video. It's pretty much my first video really where I went any sort of in-depth in terms of how I view Dynasty. If you guys want more Dynasty content like that, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'm happy to do some more of that as well. Up next, I'll be doing a video on some of my must-draft players. I'll be going over 15 players that I've been drafting pretty much everywhere, guys that I really do target going into my drafts, and guys that I think are really going to be high-end performers. So if you do want to make sure you catch that video, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. If you're not, please do that. You can also click the notification bell so you get notifications when more videos come out. If you haven't yet, please do like the video, give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm, really helps grow the channel, really helps me know that I'm doing a good job as well, and helps me know that you guys are enjoying the content. So yeah, I want to thank you guys so much for watching the video, and I'll catch you next time. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.